All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to unpack a really important new safety directive that affects a very popular private jet, the Embraer 135BJ. It's a fascinating look at the invisible threats in aviation and the, well, super detailed rules that are designed to keep us all safe up there. So, what does a tiny, almost invisible crack in a metal wing have in common with a thick, 100-page legal document? You might be thinking, what's the connection? Well, it turns out the answer is everything. That little crack is the physical danger. It's called metal fatigue. And that legal document is the complex bureaucratic fix that makes sure we find it before it becomes a disaster. Okay, so first, we've got to understand the problem itself. We're talking about a hidden danger known as metal fatigue. It's something that can affect any aircraft, no matter how perfectly it was built. You know how you can bend a paperclip back and forth? At first, it's fine. But you keep doing it, and it gets weaker and weaker until it just snaps. Well, the same basic thing happens to airplane parts over thousands of flights. Tiny little cracks start to form, and if they go undetected, they can grow and really threaten the entire structure of the plane. And this isn't just us talking. The official language from the regulators at Brazil's aviation agency, ANAC, is crystal clear. They're not pulling any punches here. They're saying that if you don't do these inspections, you could miss these cracks, and that would have, well, some very serious consequences.
So, when you're faced with a threat like this, how do the aviation authorities fight back? They issue something called an Airworthiness Directive, or just an AD. This is the official solution.
Now, an AD is not a suggestion. It is a legally enforceable rule. The best way to think about it is like a mandatory safety recall for your car. You know, if the car maker finds a problem, you have to bring it in to get fixed. An AD is exactly that, but for a multi-million-dollar jet. The specific directive we're digging into today is this one, AD 2025-09-02. And just look at who it applies to. All Embraer EMB-135B jets, every single one that's ever been made. This is a massive fleet-wide update. So this AD brings in a whole bunch of new maintenance rules. You see these acronyms, ALI, CMR, and so on, but don't worry about the jargon. What they really do is protect every critical aspect of the plane. You've got rules specifically to find those tiny fatigue cracks, others to safeguard the fuel system, and even rules that track the lifespan of the most critical parts to make sure they're replaced long before they could ever fail.
Okay, so you've got this big legal document, but how does a piece of paper actually turn into, real work with wrenches and technicians on the hangar floor? Let's look at the engineer's playbook.
It's a really methodical, step-by-step process. First, the engineering teams have to pore over every single word of the new directive. Then, they have to completely rewrite the plane's maintenance manual. After that, they have to schedule all these new inspections. And finally, every single thing they do has to be documented perfectly to prove they're in compliance. And just to be clear, this isn't just about doing the same old checks a little more often. No. The whole goal here is to bring in brand new tasks, much stricter limits for wear and tear, and totally different schedules for inspections. It's a complete overhaul based on the latest safety data. But, it's never that simple, is it? Here's a complication. A lot of these jets are used by corporations or private owners, and they get heavily customized. Things like special antennas or extra fuel tanks. So what happens then?
Well, if a modification makes one of the standard inspections impossible, you can't just skip it. The operator has to go back to the regulators and request something called an alternative method of compliance, or AMOC. Basically, they have to prove, with cold, hard engineering data, that their different inspection plan is just as safe as the original one.
So you can see how one single rule creates all these ripples that spread out. It affects everything. Safety, of course, but also daily operations and, you guessed it, the bottom line. The difference is pretty huge. Operators are going from a routine, predictable maintenance schedule to something way more intensive. The old manual basically goes out the window. The entire program has to be rewritten from the ground up to meet these new, much stricter requirements.
And when you break down the impacts, safety is, of course, the biggest piece of the pie. That's the whole point. But look at that. The operational and financial hits are right up there, too. Planes spend more time in the hangar, and these new, deeper inspections cost a lot more in labor and parts.
And that means the folks on the business side of things have their own to-do list. They've got to figure out the total cost for their whole fleet, they have to update legal contracts and lease agreements, and they have to budget for the plane being out of service and not making money. It's a big deal. No, all of this work, all the engineering, all the planning, all the number crunching, it's all happening against a ticking clock, because there is a hard, non-negotiable deadline. The countdown started the second ANAC issued this directive.
All operators have until September 15th, 2025 to get everything in order. After that date, the new rules are law.
And what happens if an operator isn't ready by then? How many flights are they allowed to operate with that aircraft? The answer is a big, fat 0. It's that simple. The plane is grounded.
And listen, that is not me being dramatic. That's straight from the rulebook. The official ANAC briefing says it right there in black and white. No compliance, no operations. Period. End of story.
So for any of the aviation professionals watching who need to get into the nitty-gritty details, here's the official info. You can look up the full directive by its number, and ANAC has provided a direct email for any technical questions. So, what's the big takeaway here? We just spent all this time unpacking a single, complex safety rule for just one type of jet. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How many thousands of these invisible rules are constantly working in the background, every single day, all over the world? It's this vast, unseen system that makes flying one of the safest things you can possibly do.